While history has seen attempts to curtail or even prohibit the consumption of alcohol, its origins are closely tied to the origins of many peoples, so much so that some of the most important pre-Christian theological concepts became expressed by it, and its consumption was even adopted as part of Christian ritual. It was a drink of the gods, gift of the gods, sometimes even the blood of gods. Yet consuming it could bring life, vigor, and knowledge. It was Ishkebehe, the water of life. Yet long before whiskey was ever created, there was a beverage of truly ancient make that embedded itself in the language, history, mythology, and culture of people across the world. While we view the creation of alcohol today as a mundane scientific process, ancient people had a very different view. They didn't and couldn't know the underlying processes at work. To them, its creation was a form of magic and expressed the power of some god. The oldest of those divine drinks was mead, thought to be the oldest alcohol in the world. Honey can be found in the wild and mixed with water. It ferments naturally over time. Though we can't say for certain where the knowledge of mead first developed, some of our earliest evidence for it was found in Jiahu, China, near the Yellow River, dating to around 7000 BC. Yet despite being the earliest known archaeological evidence for mead, later evidence in China for its use is lacking. When mention of honey appears on oracle bones dating to the Shang period between 1600 and 1000 BC, the word that they use is meat, derived from Tocharian meat, and ultimately Indo-European medhu, meaning both honey and the drink made of it, called mead in English, met in German, medu in Old Church Slavonic, methu in Greek, meth in Welsh, madu in Indo-Iranian. It even made its way into Japanese, mitsu, and Vietnamese, mat. One of the only languages it wasn't preserved in was Latin, which used mel, an old Indo-European synonym for honey, also found in a number of European languages. The spread of this honey-related vocabulary is quite mysterious, but is at the root of the cult of mead. The origin of the Proto-Indo-European word might have some relation to the Proto-Semitic word for sweet. On the other hand, the word might have flowed the other direction, entering Proto-Semitic through the progenitors of the Hittites. In either case, the words for honey in Semitic or ancient Egyptian are completely unrelated. Pre-Indo-European languages such as Basque also have completely unrelated words for honey. On the other hand, while modern Finnish has borrowed the Germanic word honey, derived from the Proto-Indo-European word meaning something like yellowish brown, the Hungarian word mez is actually an extremely ancient borrowing, going back thousands of years to Proto-Finno-Ugric. The progenitors of the Hungarian language and Finnish language were Asian-dwelling hunter-gatherers. It's argued to have been borrowed from the Proto-Tocharian language, dating their interaction with Indo-Europeans to around 3000 BC. Now, surely, they must have known and had their own word for honey before coming into contact with Proto-Indo-Europeans. Why did they adopt a foreign word for it? There are two interrelated reasons. Though archaeological evidence has not, and perhaps cannot, validate this, the Indo-Europeans must have developed a specific cult of mead very early on. It is one of the most shared words of Indo-European vocabulary, as shared as words like mother and father. The process of creating mead, the sacred rituals that it was used in, and the trade of the drink and the honey that made it, must have made a significant impact on people with whom they came in contact with, such that the substance for which they already had a native word for came to take on a foreign name. In addition, it is highly likely that the Indo-Europeans did not simply gather wild honey, as most people had previously, but developed techniques of beekeeping. This would have made a significant impression on those that they came into contact with, and would likely set their honey as something different from wild honey, and likewise serve to explain the adoption of a foreign name, perhaps originally used only for domesticated farm honey, as opposed to wild honey, but eventually coming to refer to everything associated with it. For the importance that the Indo-Europeans placed on honey, it would have been next to impossible for them to be relying on only foraged wild honey. The cult of Mead required the development of the art of beekeeping. Now, when exactly this started is very difficult to say, but it likely began with the Eastern hunter-gatherers, even prior to the rise of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. While mead-making traditions likely developed independently in many places around the world, the preponderance of later evidence strongly suggests that it was among the Proto-Indo-Europeans that honey, and the drink made of it, became so important, not only as a drink, but as part of a religious ritual, seen as a conduit for the divine. While other forms of alcohol were known by Proto-Indo-Europeans, it was mead that was the most sacred and elite drink for the steppe-dwelling people since at least 4000 BC. For them, the bee was the mysterious, sacred animal which provided up the key ingredient for this magical brew. Throughout the descendant cultures, the figure of the bee holds a very special place, and the more archaic the culture, the greater reverence is given to it. Though we know that the Proto-Indo-Europeans must have been producing mead for far longer, our earliest evidence comes from the corded ware and bell beaker cultures. These groups are named for their unique pottery styles, and that pottery was used primarily for holding mead and ale. Both were used in rituals, including and especially for the dead. Their pots would be used to make and store the drink in life, and they were also buried with them in death, filled with their favorite brew. This isn't just an assumption. Analysis of the pottery has actually revealed what was kept in it. And in every case, the bell beaker and corded ware cultures were using these pots buried with the dead to keep mead or ale. The practice was so particular that they can be archaeologically identified by this practice alone, and distinguished from each other by the types of pots that they used, along with some other details. The Yamnaya also frequently buried their dead with pots, but I haven't yet seen a detailed study of their contents. Likely, however, they too were offering mead and ale to the dead. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were primarily pastoralists, not extensive grain farmers. But there is a theory that the increased focus on growing wheat by the descendant cultures such as corded ware and bell beaker was not motivated by a desire to bake bread or make porridge, but by the production of ale. Ale was widely produced across Europe by the Neolithic farmer population, and was also adopted by Proto-Indo-Europeans. But it was honey that was the more elite product, more difficult to obtain and more limited in quantity. Much greater quantities of ale could be produced with less bee stings, and thus ale was probably the less prestigious, but more common drink, even as early as the dawn of the Bronze Age. While it may be tempting to view this ancient society as just a bunch of drunks addicted to alcohol, there is a little bit more to it than that. Drinking unpurified water carries dangerous risks, and those risks were known by prehistoric peoples. However, they also realized that through the magic of the fermentation process, the water was made safe to drink. The overall alcohol content of these early beverages probably wouldn't have been as strong as their modern counterparts. But given the risks of drinking contaminated water, it was far preferable from a health perspective alone to consume low-strength alcohol. This is why alcohol in our earliest sources, right through to the name of whiskey, is associated with good health. The Proto-Hellenic word for mead was methu. Mycenaeans were still strongly connected with their steppe origins, and had not yet fully embraced the wine-drinking Mediterranean farmer culture. They retained the cult of the mead amongst the elite. Mycenaean art shows enigmatic depictions of bees and flowers. Some even show a god or goddess in the form of a bee. People have long wondered what the particular draw of the bee was to Mycenaeans. The explanation is their irreplaceable role in mead production. Bees were thought to have a special divine connection for their role in the producing of honey. For the Mycenaeans, the bee and the flowers that they were associated with were divine symbols. Some later Greeks, such as Aristotle, even thought that bees did not mate, but emerged spontaneously from the flowers themselves. Homer's Iliad still preserves some of this tradition, as honey is frequently offered to the gods, and wine is often described poetically as melintheia oinon, honey-sweet wine. In the funeral for Patroclus, 2 jars of honey were also put on the fire for him, echoing the ancient traditions of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, and likely the tumulus culture of Central Europe at the time. The Greek word for drunkenness, methi, and amethistos, not drunk, developed in an identical way as the Welsh word for drunk, methu, from the word for mead, showing that in the Proto-Greek period, mead was still the predominant alcohol, with its physical effects directly named for the drink itself. There is solid evidence that honey and mead were originally associated with Apollo. His son Melesios was the god of honey and beekeeping, responsibilities he shared with Aristaios, another son of Apollo. A story exists of a contest between Aristaios and Dionysus, where mead and wine respectively were sampled by the gods. Though the gods liked both, they could only drink a limited amount of mead before tiring of it, but could drink wine without end, and so Dionysus was given first prize. However, this story dates to the classical period, expressing the later preference for wine, likely due to its easier production. A more archaic tradition is connected to Melissa. In myth, it is the name of a nymph or a group of nymphs who introduced honey, from the word for honey, meli, which is cognate with Gaelic meal. They are mentioned by Hesiod, where they are said to have been created by the blood of Uranos falling upon the earth. Hesiod believed that the third race of men had been born of these honey nymphs, who likewise gave their name to the ash tree, due to its honey-like sap. In one tradition, it was the Melissae who fed baby Zeus. Of this bee fostering of Zeus, Diodorus Siculus said, "And the nymphs nurtured the child on a mixture of honey and milk, and gave him upbringing at the udder of a goat, which was called Amalthea. The god, they say, wishing to preserve an immortal memory of his close association with the bees, changed the color of them, making it like copper with the gleam of gold. And since the region lay at a very great altitude, where fierce winds blew about it, and heavy snows fell, he made the bees insensible to such things, and unaffected by them, since they must range over the most wintry stretches." The connection between honey and the divine was so central to Greek religion that some priestesses were actually called Melissa. This was explained by saying that they were as pure and holy as bees, though there was likely a more archaic origin to this. Perhaps they began as the bearers of honey during sacrifices. The priestess of the Delphian Apollo is referred to as Melissa. In the Homeric hymn to Hermes, Apollo bestows upon the god prophecies involving the Thriae nymphs. They were associated with divination from pebbles. Yet these nymphs, dwelling on Mount Parnassus, were imagined as bees with the heads of women. The reverse of this, women with the heads and arms of bees, are found depicted on Mycenaean-era artifacts. Without a doubt, these have a common origin with the Melissae. Just as the Melissae raised Zeus, the Thriae raised Apollo. Now, though Apollo's cult may have handed over these nymphs to Hermes on paper, in practice, Apollo was never totally separated from the bees. One of the god's lovers was Melia, a nymph of chaos, and their son was the eponymous king of the island. The ancient connection resides in the honey's connection to the divine inspiration. We can see the trace of this in Homer, who describes gifted speakers as using honey-sweet words or having honeyed lips. The mead was connected to the power of speech, art, and knowledge in general, though this element would be best preserved in surviving Germanic traditions. In the Anglo-Saxon poetic tradition, the name of what was effectively a proto-tavern was a mead hall. It was in this hall that the lord or king would reside with his retinue, and thus the mead was closely associated with the nobility. People would gather here for community events, and it also served as a place where the lord would receive guests. Such mead halls feature in the story of Beowulf, and excavated examples of such halls in Denmark dated to the 6th century show several examples, which were 50 meters long. In Old English, the word appears as meduseld, with seld meaning hall. It has a direct cognate with Sanskrit medusala, which refers to a tavern, and it was also used by J.R.R. Tolkien for his Meduseld, the name for the Hall of the Kings of Rohan. In Old English surviving poems, mead is mentioned more than any other drink save for wine. Likely this has more to do with the status of the beverage, its mythological connections with poetry and the nobility, than it does with the actual amount of mead consumed by the general population. The reason wine takes top place is due to Christian traditions. With the spread of Christianity in the Middle Ages, wine became the new favored beverage, eventually coming to replace mead, though it remained in small supply, available only through import by the wealthy and the church. In Skaldskaparmál, Snorri Sturluson relates the story of the god named Kvasir. He was formed from the spittle of the gods when they conducted a truce by spitting into a vat. He was renowned for being the most knowledgeable of the gods. It is said, Kvasir went up and down the earth to give instruction to men, and when he came upon the invitation to the abode of certain dwarves, Fjalar and Gjalar, they called him to have a private converse with them, and killed him, letting his blood run into 2 vats and a kettle. The kettle is named Odhrerir, and the vats Son and Bodn. They blended honey with the blood, and the outcome was that mead by virtue of which he who drinks it becomes a skald or scholar. Odin goes through great trouble to try and obtain this magical brew from the otherworld, where, though formed by the dwarves, it was held hostage by the Jotnar, the great obstructive forces of not only the outer cosmos of the material world, but the inner one of the subconscious. The Jotun Suttungr took the mead from the dwarves and brought it to his mountain abode, and he set his daughter Gunnlod to watch over it. Odin sneaked into the mountain, seduced the daughter, and managed to consume all the mead and escape in the form of an eagle. He was chased furiously by Suttungr, which resulted in him spitting, or in some cases crapping, out some of the mead, which resulted in the general abilities present in any substandard poet or common man. But he brought the vast majority of it back to Asgard and filled vats of it. And this was distributed to the gods, and is bestowed upon mortals, which the god chooses. There is or was almost certainly a connection here with the real mead and its effects upon one who consumes it. Alcohol can have a liberating effect on one's mind and body, and that effect was believed to be related to the power of the divinity. The mead of poetry is not a physical thing, but a spiritual state of inspiration and pure knowledge. It was believed to be doled out to people in a predestined way. One cannot achieve more of it than Odin has granted. The name of the god whose blood gave rise to the mead of poetry, Kvasir, is also not a coincidence. Its etymology is rooted in an Indo-European term meaning to become sour, which referred to the process of fermentation. Kvasir, on a physical level, is effectively the leavening agent or yeast for the creation of alcohol. The same root gave rise to Slavic kvass, a well-known beverage enjoyed in Russia and much of Eastern Europe. It has sometimes been called a fossil beverage because of how kvass is still often made in a very similar way to how all early grain-based alcohols were produced, going back many thousands of years. Now, here's something to consider. The god whose blood made the mead of poetry is the leavening agent of knowledge, Kvasir. While on the physical level, he is that which transforms the honeyed water into mead, he exists also within you. His blood is quite literally in your blood, representing your potential knowledge and skill. Like the fermentation transforms the water and honey into mead, so Kvasir turns observations into knowledge, tasks into art, and speech into poetry. Perhaps unexpectedly, in many ways it is the Vedic tradition which most closely resembles the story of Odin and the mead of poetry. Only in that case, it may not actually be mead, but a new beverage. In a very ancient period of Indo-Iranian tradition, mead was the beverage of choice. The Indo-Iranian language and culture developed in the Santashta culture, a group who emerged from an eastward movement of the corded ware, and thus shares a common origin with Germanic, Celtic, and other European peoples. The Bronze Age Indo-Iranians had another preferred drink, however, which replaced mead, likely developed from local traditions that they encountered. They elevated this drink to the status of a god, akin in many ways to Kvasir, soma. The word is derived from the Proto-Indo-European seu, meaning to press. It was created from the juices pressed from a special plant, which the texts call by the same name, though scholars are unsure of exactly which plant was originally used. Some even think that soma was a form of mead, to which the juice of a specific plant was later added. There are also numerous references which associate honey as well as milk with the drink. In a hymn to the Ashvins, it says, "To you in praise of sweetness sang the honey bee. Ausia calleth you in soma's rapturous joy. Ye do upon yourselves the spirit of Daya, and the horse's head uttered his words to you." As early as the Rig Veda, a basic story of soma was present. It was held captive in the sky or a mountain, where it was found and taken away by an eagle, who bore it back for the benefit of gods and men. Sometimes the finding of the soma is ascribed to Indra, other times the Ashvins or Agni. Though greatly expanded and altered through later centuries, the core of this story is nearly identical to that in Norse myth, where Odin, in the form of an eagle, brings the mead of poetry out of the mountain held by the giant for the benefit of gods and men. Though referring to a different drink, the core mythology and importance of it remains exactly the same. The gods, especially Indra and Agni, were believed to drink it in vast quantities. The soma ritual was one of the most important Vedic rituals. A hymn from the Rig Veda recalls its offering. For thee, O Lord of light, are shed these soma drops, and grass is strewn. Bring Indra to his worshippers. May Indra give thee skill and light of heaven, wealth to his votary, and priests who praise him. Though the specific drink changed, the importance of the ritual drink, which provided physical and psychological effects, remained, and even reached an entirely new level of importance during the Vedic period. Celtic languages have numerous words derived from the root. Proto-Celtic medu gives us mead in Scottish Gaelic, mea in Irish, and Welsh mead. The Proto-Celtic offshoot word, medwos, meaning pertaining to mead, in Welsh became meddu, and in Irish, meddev, meaning the same thing, drunk. Yes, the name Maeve means drunk. Maeve symbolizes the drink of sovereignty, which they need to possess in order to lay divine claim to rule. Upon the coronation of a king, they were required to drink the sacred mead of sovereignty. In a tale involving the legendary King Conn, the god Lugh bestows such a drink upon him. Lugh also seems to have been associated with exactly the same type of concept as the mead of poetry. In the poem, the doorkeeper said to the noble warrior, the god explains his abilities in the following way. I am a poet from Ewin Ablach, of swans and ewes. Is there a craftsman in the house in which the company is, the hostel, that can leap upon a bubble without it breaking? An offer for his recounting, swimming over the unknown waters, bearing a vat on the back of my arm, are two arts in my capacity. One might wonder how this information alone conveys to the doorkeeper that the god possesses every art. Both statements of Lugh subtly convey it. Weightlessness in Gaelic tradition is associated with states of prophetic mania, and the vat which he carries swimming over the waters is filled with mead of the otherworld, the equivalent of the Norse mead of poetry. Archaeological evidence shows that the beverage of status among Proto-Celts was mead. While the common man drank mostly beer, the Celtic elite saw mead as their prestige drink, later supplanted to some extent in the late Iron Age by imported Greek and Roman wine. The reason for this may not be only rooted in rarity, but in custom developed since the Neolithic. Metheglin is a special spiced mead created by the Welsh. Braggot is another Welsh type, which combines both honey and ale. The type may have been mentioned as early as the ancient Greek writer and traveler Pytheas, one of the earliest Greeks to travel throughout northern Europe. He mentions that the people of Thule created a type of mead combined with grains. At the site of the High Kingship of Ireland, Tewer or Tara, one of the most important and most mentioned buildings was the Tech Mead Huarda, House of the Mead Circuit. Provincial and local kings all had their own, although slightly less prestigious, mead houses. Some of that Celtic love of mead is expressed in early medieval Welsh poetry in the Book of Taliesin, Cani y Medd, the Song to Mead. May Malgwyn of Mona be affected with mead and affect us, from the foaming mead horns, with the choice pure liquor, which the bees collect and do not enjoy. Mead distilled sparkling, its praise is everywhere. Many references are to be found in the medieval writings of the Welsh showing that the drink of nobility, and perhaps especially the bards, was mead, who still viewed it with a certain sacred air. In the poem of the Gododin, the martial qualities of Mead are extolled. Before Gododin's forces were shunned, pressed hard for the land of Manawit, he would spare neither mail shirt nor shield. None could, on Mead he was nourished, ward off the stroke of Cadvanan. The mead was also a payment of sorts for the warriors who were gifted it by the lord who commanded their service. Gododin's war band on shaggy mounts, steeds the hue of swans in full harness, fighting for Edin's treasure and mead. But there was also a darker side. The mead was drunk by these warriors in preparation for battle. It may have been the continuation of the ancient cult practices, but the battle went disastrously for the Britons. The Gododin is a praise poem to honor the men who died in that battle, and the poet often invokes the mead as the instrument of their doom, not because they were drunk while fighting, but because their commitment to the doomed battle had been secured through the gifting of mead. From Catraith, from catastrophe, from Bryn Hithun before it fell, after holding bright mead in hand, never a one saw his father. Men launched the assault, moving as one. Short were their lives, made drunk by pure mead. Minethaug's band, renowned in battle, for a feast of mead they gave their lives. The Slavs likewise have a powerful mead culture. In some places, mead retains a wide popularity, especially in Poland. Archaeological evidence from the early medieval period, identified as Slavic, has found ceramic beehives and wooden bee shelters, large brewing vats and fermentation jars, with the earliest evidence tracing back to eastern Poland and Belarus, believed to be the heartland of the Slavs before their migrations. Just like their corded-ware ancestors, the Slavs continued the tradition of producing and using mead in rituals, including for the dead, well into the medieval period. Throughout the territory of the Kievan Rus and into Greater Moravia, modern-day Czechia and Slovakia, early medieval Slavs were still buried together with vessels containing traces of honey. Yet we not only have archaeological evidence for the association between mead and ritual, but historical accounts. The primary chronicle, written in the 12th century, preserves an account of a ritual use of mead. Olga then sent to the Derevlians the following message: I am now coming to you, so prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. When they heard these words, they gathered great quantities of honey and brewed mead. In this case, it isn't clear if the mead was actually offered to the dead or was simply used as part of the funeral feast, but likely the difference is small. In another case, a celebratory nature is recorded. After he had thus escaped, Vladimir founded the church and made ready a great festival, for which he caused to be brewed 300 kettles of mead. With the thought that the weak and the sick could not easily reach his palace, he arranged that wagons should be brought in, and after having them loaded with bread, meat, fish, various fruits, mead in casks, and kvass, he ordered them driven out through the city. It is often a drink that appears in Slavic fairy tales, awarded to heroes, or as a type of otherworld drink that empowers them. The bear has been popularly associated with Russia, and in Russian it is called Medved, meaning the honey eater. In Slavic lands, mead was not supplanted as the primary drink until the Industrial Revolution. The invention of distillation processes, which allowed the creation of drinks like vodka, eventually saw mead fall into decline in most regions. But Poland remains a top mead producer, accounting for 40% of European total mead production. The ancient custom of drinking mead has been in decline for a long time. From the earliest days of the Indo-Europeans to the great warriors of the Iron Age and the mead halls of the Anglo-Saxons, the honey wine has been a part of our most important periods of history, drunk happily in life and offered respectfully in death. Perhaps it is one more magical custom waiting to be rediscovered. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this interesting, please like, share, and subscribe. Consider supporting me on Patreon, PayPal, or through YouTube Super Stickers, or become a member of the channel. I rely on supporters like you, so thank you so much for your support, and as always, stand tall.